Alright, and we're back. Marvel fans and Minecraft players alike, I hope you're all doing well. Today we're here to go over the complete history of Marvel MC's lore, which started back in 2018 with an event called One Last Stone, just before the release of Avengers Infinity War. I've been wanting to do this video since 2020, like just before the last event in this phase, which was Quest for Requiem. But now is an even better time to do it because not too long ago we opened up applications for our next whitelist, which includes a quiz that asks plenty of questions about our lore. But first, I want to take a moment and thank you all for the support on the content we've been putting out. Shout out to my animation team. They technically work for my personal channel, not Marvel MC, so huge props to them for being willing to extend their services to this server as well. On that note, if you have been enjoying the content, why not enjoy the server as well? This video will give you a lot of answers to those questions and increase your likelihood of being accepted upon learning all of the insight that it contains. So after you watch the video, there will be a link in the description for you to proceed further. Staff applications are also open. And if you're here post private run and just wanting to study the timeline of events, enjoy the ride. Let's get into it. So, our first event, One Last Stone, didn't have dialogue, but every event that occurred after that did. It's a very important part of the story. It gives the participants watching a Marvel movie-like playout in a Minecraft chat as one visualizes the event unfolding. The thing is though, if I read the dialogue of all 20 or so events that are canon, who knows how long this video will turn out to be. With that in mind, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to rehash the events as if I were doing a recap, and we'll let the dialogue play out in the background in case you want to follow it. I'm also going to sprinkle in important information as it becomes relevant. That way, I'm not giving you a ton of pretext that takes forever to get through before going over the actual story, but also not leaving you clueless about how certain things work until the end. First, let's begin with a starting point. When does the timeline begin? What's already happened before and what hasn't happened yet? Well, what I can tell you is that we use the MCU's timeline as a template, and our first event was basically our own Infinity War. So think of anything pre-Avengers Infinity War as canon, unless we decide to do a particular event going over how things unfolded in our timeline, such as the War Within event, which does Civil War a little differently. Alright, I won't edge you guys for too long. Let's talk about One Last Stone, Marvel MC's first story-driven event. This took place in 2018, but there was a 2019 revamp of it, which was to reintroduce the event to the newer players at that time and clean up the story a bit. I'm going to mostly unpack the 2019 revamp, since that's the latest reiteration of it. The plot is that the Mad Titan Thanos has all but one Infinity Stone left to complete his Infinity Gauntlet. We didn't know this at the time, because the film wasn't out yet, but Avengers Infinity War starts with Thanos already having one stone. Our story begins with Thanos only needing one more to complete his goal. Coincidentally, that stone turns out to be the Power Stone. According to the template we use, the Power Stone is on Xandar, guarded by the Nova Corps. So, in order to obtain it, he uses the Time Stone and the Space Stone to make its star younger. This makes the star more fierce and powerful enough to change the environment's climate conditions into a more hell-like planet. So, instead of doing basically what Ronan did in Guardians of the Galaxy, he does something a lot more vicious, and that's essentially making the planet uninhabitable to save himself the time and labor that it would have taken to do a full-on invasion. This is on par with the way Thanos behaved in Infinity War on Battle of Wakanda. Since he had all of the stones except for Mind, he took the easy way out with every person that confronted him. The crash site of the Dark Aster begins to sink into the ground, and somewhere, the Nova Corps is entirely within the destruction. The Guardians of the Galaxy contact the Avengers as they arrive for assistance on finding the stone before Thanos can in this new demonic Xandar. But not only does Thanos decide to make Xandar a more prehistoric form of itself, but he summons Aether Clouds into the atmosphere of it. The Guardians and the Avengers, along with other teams of Earth's mightiest heroes, are ready to fight, but they're risking manipulation of reality that may lead to possible betrayal. After Thanos is complete with basically putting a star through a fountain of youth, figuratively speaking, the head start search for the Power Stone has already begun by the heroes. The process, Loki quickly betrays Thanos by bashing his scepter back at Thanos' head, stunning him with the piercing of it in his stomach, and then quickly swiping the Space Stone before putting it in his scepter. So, this is also another MCU parallel. In Thor Ragnarok, Loki doubled back for the Tesseract. In this continuity, Loki at some point must have returned to Earth for the scepter, presumably during his time posing as Odin, while Thor was out searching for the Infinity Stones, while the Avengers were split apart. From there, Loki travels all around Earth and other places in the universe to gather villains, to then round up at a safe space inside the Dark Aster, waiting for the heroes to betray each other as a result of the Aether Clouds, thus making them more vulnerable. Not only that, but Loki has made it their goal as a pack to find the stone before them to be even more powerful and pose a threat to the Mad Titan. So now it's heroes such as the Avengers and the Guardians versus Thanos and everything that comes with that, such as Chitauri and Black Order, versus Loki and his crew of familiar villains. It's never explicitly stated, but since Thanos and his troops also couldn't survive these conditions, he eventually reverts things back once damage is done and no longer needed. Once the stone is found, however, Loki actually betrays his villains and reunites with Thanos. So Loki's betrayal was more of a grand scheme to increase the likelihood of finding the stone for him by increasing the amount of threats that the heroes were up against. The end result is a boss battle between Thanos and Loki against the heroes, aka the players, and the stakes were real. If players could beat Thanos and Loki, the stones would have been divided up among them based on achievements that had occurred throughout the event, such as whoever got the last hit on Loki, whoever did the most damage to Thanos, etc. In some cases, it was already set in stone who would get what stone back, like Strange would have gotten the Time Stone back regardless, as long as there was a victory. But if they could not beat Thanos, all the stones will be officially stripped from all characters, all locations, which also means Vision would become a banned character, due to being unoperational without the Mind Stone, since his version of the character takes after the MCU. And that's unfortunately what happened. The players lost, Vision was no longer a character people could use. Thanos had all the stones, the players were given a chance to redeem themselves at the event that followed, called Marvel MC's Redemption. Redemption follows Thanos as he is in the process of setting everything in motion before eliminating half of all life. Professor Hulk, when he snapped an endgame, took a pretty big hit because there was a lot of calculations at play. Not only bringing everyone back, but making sure they got back safely across the entire universe. As a result, he had an arm injury that they say is permanent. Similarly, when Thanos destroyed the stones, he also faced a very life-threatening injury. In this case, he has all the stones, that part of the goal is complete, and he's in no rush to make it happen. Imagine everything that's being taken into consideration. How many planets need to be exempt from half of all life being eliminated, since he had already eliminated half of their population manually? How many of those planets didn't keep their reproduction under control and fell back into their previous state? In the MCU, some people believe that Iron Man was exempt from being snapped due to Doctor Strange surrendering the Time Stone in exchange for Stark's life being spared. So that's another thing to consider. How many individuals rightfully deserve to be exempt as well? And what about aftermath? What precautions can be taken in that moment to lessen the resistance? These are all things that are being measured, and those measurements will determine how much damage Thanos might take in the process, which he also has to prepare for. This is where the mythos gets interesting, so try to follow along best you can. Loki asks Thanos a $1 billion question, which is, where is the Soul Stone? Noticing that he has all the other stones and is able to complete his goal thanks to the chain of infinite power that one gains once they have all 6. Thanos reveals that the Soul Stone to him is actually wherever he calls home, his Titan, if you will. It's been at the center of his place in the universe, comparable to Vormir, where the Soul Stone is housed in the MCU, being the center of celestial existence. The Soul Stone, in this continuity, plays the biggest role in balancing the universe, while also giving him the ability to bring back the dead by accessing the Soul World, where he will watch the sunrise. At first glance, this sounds a bit confusing. What does this mean? How did this come about? Was the Soul Stone a planet this whole time? Does Thanos have the connection to the Soul Stone that Adam Warlock does in the comics? Well, it's never quite explored, but Loki warns Thanos that the heroes might not be done yet. Thanos says that they aren't supposed to be, and that's all part of his sacrifice. But who will the soul sacrifice carry out on, Loki asks, as he recalls Thanos previously mentioning that he had already started collecting souls. Remember what I said about lessening the resistance? Well, Thanos actually abducted Captain Marvel back in the 20th century, one of Earth's greatest forces, but warns that there are ways to escape the soul world. Based on this, it's possible that Thanos made a deal with Death, who would have influence over the soul realm, to provide Thanos with a bridge that would give him an upper hand to be able to accomplish his goals as long as he's able to continue to defeat it. That goal being to restore Titan by making Titan 2 as a holy grail at the conclusion of life. Loki suspiciously suggests that he should be allowed to check out the soul world, prevent escapes. Thanos says that he will, and kills him to prevent any more changes in allegiance, sending him to the soul world in the process. Next, he takes Xandar and uses the Infinity Stones to begin the conversion. Xandar is now New Titan and the home of the soul world, making it a place that people can physically visit rather than being a pocket realm that has to be accessed. As a result of this, the heroes find Captain Marvel on New Titan. Nick Fury joins the party, and they battle the Black Order. The conclusion of this is basically similar to the conclusion Thanos reaches in Endgame, which is that even if Thanos is right about his goals, this is one of those situations where the truth is what everyone agrees on. And if everyone is willing to show up to ensure that goal doesn't happen, or try to undo the steps that he's taken to get there, then perhaps the reality is that he isn't right for this universe, which means he should probably accept that until the universe is able to see his vision. So he decides to settle the dispute with one last battle. If he wins, then he will use greater force to achieve his goal by much harsher means. If he loses, the casualties such as Vision and Captain Marvel will be freed, and he will surrender the stones except for Soul, and get to keep his new paradise. Thankfully, the players actually did redeem themselves by defeating Thanos. The Time Stone went back to Strange, the Reality Stone went back to the Collector, Mind Stone to Vision, the Power Stone went to Rocket, Thanos kept Soul, of course, and Space Stone went to Black Bolt, who passed it to Agent Venom, and it was then secured by Teenage Groot. For our next event, which arguably has one of the best posters, there may be a few things wrong with the mythos. I get a lot of praise for my events and the stories that I've been able to tell, but my writing is not and has never been perfect. 2018 was my first year writing the lore, and it had to evolve over time. Same with my knowledge of Marvel, I had to learn throughout my years running the server, so please bear with me. The event, Rise of the Dark Surfer, is based around a threat from the Earth-911119 universe, who has a complete Infinity Gauntlet. It kicks off with Thanos, Keeper of the Soul Stone, being given an offer from the Dark Surfer to help balance the universe side by side together. The difference is, according to him, this time there's a guarantee that it would be successful. He also believes that the two Soul Stones working together would make things almost effortless. However, the issue with this premise, as I'm sure a lot of you have already caught on to by now, is that Infinity Stones don't work outside of their universes. There's a very well-known comic panel of Darkseid from the DC universe wielding a full gauntlet that renders useless because it's DC universe and not Marvel. So how do we get past this? Let's find out. The story continues to unfold. For now, all you need to know is that somehow the Dark Surfer entity managed to separate himself from the Silver Surfer of his timeline and slip through the cracks of the universe into ours. The heroes were previously told by Thanos that he would lay off until he is ready to complete his ultimate goal. So they are aware that he is alive and could be ready to strike again at any time. Since they know this, they start getting ready to prepare for another battle in case of the event that they would need to once again. After showing Thanos the Infinity Gauntlet from his universe and the Infinity Sword that goes with it, he is immediately impressed. Thanos is actually familiar with who the Dark Surfer is, or at least who he was before the two artifacts turned him into something more. As they conversate about what Thanos has been up to in this universe and whatnot, Thanos shows him his latest mark, New Titan, as well as its history as formerly being Xandar, capital of the Nova Empire. When Dark Surfer is introduced to the Black Order, they were all jailed using the Space Stone's gravitational force field with Thanos. This transition was all part of Dark Surfer's plan to take over the Earth-MC1 universe. The next step to that plan was done when Dark Surfer used the Mind Stone to take over the Black Order. They have a new ruler, making them now the Dark Order. One thing to note is that there's a noticeable absence of a Black Order member who was also left out of the Infinity War movie. Back on Earth, Tony is leading the heroes in studying the Infinity Stones in their possession. They find out a way to counter the stone's powers with different hero factors. When Dark Surfer arrives, they are surprised that it's not Thanos. Even more shockingly, an interesting move was made by Dark Surfer to change everything the heroes had planned. Not only did he have a full Infinity Gauntlet from his universe, but he split himself into 6 different clones. Each clone completely embodied the abilities of a stone. They defeated each one along with the Dark Order. According to Vision, in order to defeat them all, they must be sent to the Cosmic Infinity Pool. And the only one strong enough to accomplish that is Scarlet Witch, with the help of the Power Stone that'll help her channel that energy. And Star-Lord, who has experience with dealing with the stones directly in hand. From there, the heroes were able to defeat Dark Surfer in the finale. When this happened, all of the clones re-merged into the Dark Surfer, as Dark Surfer instantly vanished into the Cosmic Infinity Pool. The Infinity Gauntlet was left behind without its stones. The Infinity Gauntlet was the second of its kind in this universe, so it was kept in a safe place. But what's the explanation for why Dark Surfer's Infinity Stones worked? The key here is Infinity Sword. It's a relic that is only known from this surfer's native universe, and therefore not a lot is done about it. Even in this particular event that it appears in, there's no exploration until now. I've always viewed the Infinity Sword as something that can paint a better picture for what the stones can be capable of, but not necessarily for the best. You see, this artifact is what played a part in Surfer going dark. It's a consequential counterpart to what's supposed to be the best solution the universe has to offer. So much that it breaks the rules by acting as a multiversal anchor, binding the stones, in essence, through Dark Surfer's corruption, letting them function across universes. So thanks to the Infinity Sword, the stones do work, but imperfectly, unstable, and reliant on his sword's bond. The question is, where did the sword go? Who knows? Our next event is titled Weapon X's Escape, and this video marks the introduction of mutants to the continuity. With the help of Wade Wilson, a huge escape has been led at the local military HQ in the main city. Scattered across the districts were several individual weapon subjects, such as Deadpool and Sabretooth. A certain amount of them must be found in order for the government to consider all areas safe again. So clearly, there's some kind of discrimination going on. And that was the original message behind the X-Men comics. It was a parallel to the civil rights movement. You can fill in the gaps here, but the implication is that mutants have existed, they've been around, similar to the way Skrulls have been around, just kept under wraps for one reason or another that led to resistance from individuals of power, the same kind of individuals who would later sign off on these Sokovia Accords. Anyhow, one escape leads to another, and eventually Magneto is the final boss. They defeat him, collect his helmet as another relic alongside the gauntlet from the event before, and the rest of the mutants proceed to escape. Kitty Pryde is among them, and her connection, aka Star-Lord, is their exit ticket, taking them off planet, which sets up the sequel perfectly. More on that in a moment. Before we get to the sequel, the event that immediately follows is called Wakanda's Own Medicine. Shortly after announcing what Wakanda has to offer to the world, their signature mineral is all stolen, other than a few sets of Black Panther armor. T'Challa calls the Avengers and their associate heroes to help them fight the battle that just might be the ending of it all. The sequence of the event is very simple. It started with some magical reveal that Claw and Killmonger were still alive and that they were partially responsible for the army that came first, and then they followed as final bosses. It's then learned through word of mouth that it was actually Deadpool who stole some vibranium during a pit stop before the mutants actually left the planet when they escaped. The event was essentially a bridge between the previous one and the next one, but I'm officially retconning the part with Claw and Killmonger. It just doesn't make any sense at all unless Claw came back full Terminator mode, and maybe in a scenario where Killmonger actually agreed to be healed and locked up instead of letting himself die. But even then, there was actually a conflict between the two of them that the Wakandans didn't know about, and it led to Killmonger killing Claw on screen, which means it's certainly not a setup like in One Last Stone, where Thanos and Loki staged a backstabbing to come out on top later. So consider that part of the event purged. The only thing that officially happened was that the mutants stole vibranium on their way out. Which brings us to an event called Guardians for the Mutants. It's basically a civil war between the Avengers and the Guardians of the Galaxy, who are fighting on behalf of the X-Men and mutants alike. After the huge war had broken out in between the mutants from the Weapon X unit and the heroes under Sokovia Accords, Kitty Pryde called Star-Lord for help despite their complicated history, since last time they talked, Star-Lord arrived on Earth to pick her up with Wolverine and Deadpool. Tony Stark and the Avengers now have a trace of where they are after tracking the mineral waves of the vibranium that Deadpool stole before leaving with everyone on the Milano. The heroes find the Guardians, confront them, and expect to be able to apprehend the thieves, but by the time they were able to track the team down, they had already dropped off the mutants in an undisclosed location where they could be free. Black Panther is just there for the vibranium, but the rest of the heroes, such as Iron Man, are in a tough spot. And that's because since the Accords are still in effect, they're obligated to follow government orders to bring them in. Star-Lord agrees to tell them where they are, presumably so that the King can at least get his vibranium back, under the condition that they do not bring them in. Stark has bent the rules a bit before, such as keeping certain things in confidence from Ross, so perhaps he could do the same thing here, right? Maybe not. The heroes proceed to Burhart, where the mutants are, to obtain vibranium, but also apprehend the mutants. The Guardians naturally intervene and take on the Avengers. If the Avengers win, then they rightfully get to bring the mutants in. If the Guardians win, the Avengers have to join the fight for the mutants and make the world a better place for them. And of course, justice prevails and the Guardians win. The only thing I've changed about this event is that Steve Rogers is written as Captain America, even though technically he's Nomad at this point. But the fact that he's still currently able to coexist with Iron Man and work together and fight for a cause is still consistent with both characters, even though there might be tension despite being on the same page. Now, for the first time, we have an event with a post-credit scene, and it's when Symbiote bonds to all the Guardians that are there on Burhart. Now's a good time to mention that Gamora is not in the picture. She's not been present for this entire event. This one's an interesting one. It's called Out of Distress, and it's the first one to be co-written by me and another player. The X-Men, Avengers, Black Panther, and other participants from the battle on Burhart are still going through jump points to Earth when they receive a distress signal from the familiar voice of Gamora. They follow the provided coordinates, and they find themselves on a very large starship loaded with ships, pods, and guarded by several armies of species. All while the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy are still on Burhart wondering what has gotten onto them. The team answer to the signal to show these guards who's boss to get to Gamora and whoever else is on this huge starship. Just before they receive the signal, a dialogue is had about the fate that awaits the X-Men once they return to Earth. The heroes assure them that their promise will be kept. In the signal, Gamora reports that she's being held captive on the Sanctuary 2 along with Agent Thompson. When the heroes arrive, they fight off some Skrulls. As they continue to search the ship, they stumble upon more menacing Skrulls that are covered in symbiote. Blending in among them is Agent Venom, aka Flash Thompson. He gets into a fight with the heroes, not quite realizing that they were there to help. After they restrain him and get him on the same page, he says he and Gamora came to the ship to rescue Nebula. They find Nebula, free her, and continue their search for Gamora. But once they find her, they are faced with an entire fleet of symbiote-hosted Skrulls. In the process of this tense, elaborate battle, Agent Venom is smuggled into a pod and taken elsewhere. According to the travelogues on the ship, they're en route to Klyntar, the symbiote homeworld. It's being presumed that he's being used as bait. Nebula opts to go to Klyntar first and suggests that Gamora uses her pod to gather up the Guardians. Stark has to return to Earth after now being sent a time limit on returning the mutants. But Captain Rogers tells them that if they're needed on Klyntar, they will be there. The post-credit scene for this event is essentially a symbiote scroll giving Thanos a report, which is that Nebula was freed and Gamora escaped to her friends, which means they took the bait and will more than likely try to stop him again. Thanos decides to let them try. Gamora arrives on Berhard in the event titled Klyntar Is Our Galaxy, with news for the Guardians that Flash Thompson was found to be kidnapped by the Skrulls in a base on Klyntar, the planet of the symbiotes. The Guardians risk their lives being lost or taken over by this strong parasitic species, while the Avengers have mandatorily headed back to Earth. Nebula is nowhere to be found on Klyntar in search for Agent Thompson, with the Guardians missing a few teammates while Thanos on the rise again with fresh new armies. 40 minutes prior to the Guardians' arrival on Klyntar, Thompson has a conflict with the symbiote. After losing the fight with the heroes of Sanctuary 2, followed by letting Skrulls abduct him, the symbiote lets him go out of frustration, believing that they need a more brave, intuitive host, and opts to leave him stranded on this world to get eaten by its friends. Thankfully, Thompson is able to talk him off this ledge. He asks that his military background and willingness to cooperate and be dangerous is considered. The symbiote agrees, and they try things again. They see about getting out of there. Now, in hindsight, I don't know how I feel about this execution for Age of Venom. It was post the Venom movie, so I played into the concept of the symbiote having its own separate identity. I also think that I didn't write Age of Venom to be enough of what you might expect out of a high school jock turned military veteran, except from when he's interacting with Peter. It definitely gets a lot better when he returns in a later event, but this one's definitely a work in progress, and there are a few plausible reasons why things are the way they are. Maybe Thompson is still traumatized from, losing his legs. Maybe the symbiote is highly corrupt, causing it to be a bigger bully towards a weaker-spirited Thompson. But ideally, participants and readers shouldn't have to do too much thinking to understand the story. Moving on. Agent Venom proceeds to a small town on Klyntar. So yes, the planet is a bit colonized. They overhear someone bragging that they've been to Earth, and so he demands to be taken there. Otherwise, he's going to be the symbiote's problem from there. And the guy fesses up that he's lying, so the Venom and Agent Venom takes him out from there. Gamora finds Thompson in a blacksmith, but the symbiote immediately took over and started taking the Guardians on. Once they neutralize a hostile Agent Venom for the second time, Gamora explains that it isn't his fault and that he can't control it because symbiotes are able to perform better when they're on their homeworld. To get the real Thompson, they're going to have to get him off the planet. Far from it, at that. But before they can get to that point, since the Rocket and Groot are still covered in it as well, it starts to take over and they begin to lose control, leading to another conflict. What I like about Klyntar Is Our Galaxy is not only the story and context, but that it was the introduction of participant votes. Similar to Minecraft Story Mode, where the players get to decide what would happen next and there'd be a pre-written outcome for both options. In this case, it's should they return to Earth so that Agent Venom can regain full control over the dominant symbiote and be able to help the Guardians against a hostile Rocket and Groot, who aren't used to housing symbiote, or should they keep the fight on Klyntar where they still have to find Nebula? The players voted to return to Earth. I personally would have preferred that they stay on Klyntar, but what I didn't realize was that I didn't make it sound like a balanced decision. I didn't stress out that Nebula is still on Klyntar, making it sound like a no-brainer that they should get out of there. So they return to Earth, which calms Agent Venom back down and gets the Avengers involved to help them deal with a symbiote invasion. Unfortunately, however, Groot lost something very important, and as a result, he and Rocket have to return to Klyntar to find it. In the post-credit scene, the Sanctuary 2 pulls up to Earth, prompting Rocket and Groot to flee faster. Stark refers them to travel accommodations, so they're able to leave while the rest of the Guardians stay. In the event that follows, however, is more of a mini-event. It's a prequel to the one that follows. Stark has a big announcement coming up, but before the time comes for that, he tries to pull off one final last-minute project. Instead of putting a suit of armor around the globe, he tries wrapping the world in wrapping paper. That's right, he attempts to give the kids of the world a cool little gadget. First Ultron, now Kron, short for Chronicle, a Santa superbot. And naturally, the bot turns evil due to consisting of Ultron, giving the hero the same problem to deal with. This event was a little Christmas present for the players of the server. I gave them a new boss to fight, but nothing major in terms of story. However, it did have a post-credit scene that follows Klyntar Is Our Galaxy. In this scene, Rocket is with Groot, back on Klyntar, and they go hunting for symbiote to bond with so they can blend in and start looking for that thing that they lost. But Thanos appears behind them, asking them if they were looking for this, that being the Space Stone. And the answer is yes. Groot was in possession of the Space Stone, and he lost it. And now Thanos has it, along with the Soul Stone that he already had. Ultron Genesis is one of our best events yet. I'm also a huge fan of the trailer for it. It's essentially Age of Ultron 2, while serving as a crossover with the Guardians and various Spider-Man characters. Ultron wasn't enough, and maybe the success of creating Vision boosted Tony's confidence back up a bit, but then Kron also wasn't enough. Tony Stark's major announcement turned out to be another new project called the Iron Avengers. Essentially, he made Iron Man suits for the Avengers to wear that mimic their abilities, while also serving the same purpose as an Iron Man. Not a bad idea at all, especially when the next crisis comes along. The issue is that these suits are also designed to act independently without the Avengers. Sometimes people need to burn themselves 50 to 100 times before they can learn from their mistakes. But before we get into how those events unfold, let's pick up where we left off on Klyntar. Now that Thanos has the Space Stone, he demands that they hand over the other two, Power and Time. That's right, Groot also has a Time Stone, and not the Doctor Strange. How did that happen? Well, the story will eventually explain that. Rocket commands Groot to hand over the Time Stone. But as he's handing it over, Rocket immediately starts blasting Thanos with the Power Stone IPU, otherwise known as the Infinite Power Utilizer. It's a device that can carry a stone and allow use of its power for characters that can't hold the stones by hand. This helps them get away. Back on Earth, the Sanctuary 2 turns to bubbles. Literally. Gamora suspects that it's a Reality Stone, but not quite, because the Collector has the Reality Stone. The most logical thing at this point, since Thanos is on Klyntar, is that it was some kind of illusion or projecting technology. Evidently, though, Thanos did want them to think that he was there. Anywho, Tony Stark makes it to his press conference with the heroes in attendance and unveils the Iron Avengers. And as with all innovative things that Stark tries to accomplish, they go haywire, specifically targeting Stark and Spidey. As one may be able to guess by this point, this leads to a boss battle between the heroes and 4 Iron Avengers: Iron Hulk, Silver Widow, Iron Hammer, and Captain Iron, if I'm not mistaken. And Iron Hammer is actually a thing from the comics, so feel free to look that up. But this boss battle has a twist, which is that since Tony and Spidey were incapacitated in the lead-up to this event, they are excluded from the battle, making it more of a challenge for the players who participated, since they have 2 major characters out of the picture. The Guardians help neutralize this situation, and Nomad joins in the aftermath. And needless to say, he is not happy. Things don't go over well between him and Tony. In fact, Nomad storms off. Meanwhile, back on Klyntar, Rocket and Groot are hiding out in the cave, away from Thanos. Rocket orders Groot to give him the Time Stone so that they can use it to their advantage. When Groot refuses, Requiem appears, commanding the two to come with them if they want to live. The way I describe Requiem is a Thanos-level Gamora, similar to what we got in What If. However, Gamora is clearly on Earth, so who could it be under that hoodie? Back on Earth, Gamora reads another message that she got from Nebula, warning them not to return to Klyntar, as she's now made aware that Thanos has a Space Stone. Star-Lord believes that they must stay here on Earth to resolve what's happening now before they go any further. And the situation is getting worse, as several places throughout the city have been hit, such as PIM Technologies. Spider-Man recovers just in time to learn that Ravencroft is one of the places that were affected, seemingly due to a mass breakout. Now, let's take a moment to address Spider-Man's origins in this continuity. Spider-Man is one of the exceptions to the pre-Infinity War template. He is introduced officially in Civil War, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Since I'm explaining this in 2025, I can use this as an example. I want you to imagine Spider-Man in the MCU if he had experienced life similar to the one from your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. I almost called it freshman year. Or Spectacular Spider-Man even. In a standalone Spider-Man film, taking place in its own universe, such as Tobey Maguire's Raimi trilogy or Andrew Garfield's Amazing Spider-Man films, Spider-Man is the greater universe. However, in the MCU Spider-Man films, the greater Marvel universe is at play, and in a way, it kind of makes Spider-Man's individual world feel a bit smaller, because his movies have always been some kind of big tie-in, instead of just letting him have the space to explore how big his world can be as Spider-Man. A lot of events of the Spider-Man films are massively influenced by Iron Man. Vulture and Mysterio are technically Iron Man villains in the MCU. Spider-Man just the one stopping them. I didn't retcon Spider-Man's idolization of Iron Man, but if Agent Venom exists, and a few other notable Spider-Man characters, as you'll come to learn about in just a few moments, then that does suggest that there is a bit more progression when it comes to Spider-Man here in Earth-MC1 than in the MCU. Oscorp exists, Spidey has interacted with the symbiote. Overall, a lot more has happened than Spider-Man proving himself to Tony Stark and being rewarded with a suit. So for now, just think of it as if this Spider-Man has experienced a combination of the things that every Spider-Man before him has experienced, give or take a few exceptions. So, they decide to see what the situation is at Ravencroft, where Star-Lord steps in symbiote. Spidey catches it in a web net and they move on. What they've noticed is that each location that's been hit has been stolen from, or wiped clean some kind of way. The Avengers Tower has missing Iron Legion drones, plus spare parts. Pym Tech had its nanotech storage emptied, and a military base had its security guards swept up. Ravencroft may have had a combination of both those things happen. Stark can't trace symbiote, but Peter knows someone who may be able to, that being Amadeus Cho. He joins the party in his own Iron Spider armor that takes more after the comics and helps lead the group to some sort of subterranean base, clearly serving as a base of operations for whoever is behind all of this. Among a few other familiar faces, they find Venom on display, who wakes up. But it's not Eddie Brock. In fact, there's no one in there. There is, however, technology inside. The gang now has to fight Cyber Venom. There are two things I want to point out. This base was actually a set piece that was built by the player who wrote Ultron Genesis. Two, I like that the events aren't limited to introducing or reintroducing characters that are already known in the Marvel Universe. The idea of Venom being manned by nanotech was completely original, and I think it works well for a number of reasons. After they defeat him, Star-Lord mistakes an evil robot with glowing red eyes for a statue, when in fact, it's the person behind all of this. Ultron wakes up, revealing himself as the mastermind. Apparently, he stashed himself in a very early model of the Iron Avengers project. Stark and Ultron have a man-to-man. Egos clash. He even gets personal by bringing up his current conflict with Steve Rogers. Iron Man even tries to take on Ultron, who immediately blasts before he can hardly rise off the ground. Instead of wiping out the human species with an extinction level event, Ultron's plan is to remake humans to his image with something he calls the Ultrex bomb, which is essentially going to convert them into drones. From then on, Earth will be called New Eden. Before leaving the highest point in the city, Ultron shows them the first prototypes of his newly reimagined human concept by unleashing the military security that he abducted. They have already been converted. The players were given 7 minutes to take down these converted drones and catch up to Ultron and stop him, since that's approximately how long it will take for him to get there. Thankfully, Nomad swooped in and was able to hold off Ultron until everyone else caught up. Ultron threatens to end Steve life if they take another step. Even worse, he demands that they back off and give him some time alone with the former Captain America. When they give the two some room, Ultron offers Nomad a deal he can't refuse, which is to stand beside him in his mission to fix the world and toss out everything wrong with it. He plucks at all the personal heartstrings, how Stark is a hypocrite, and how Nomad ought to know more than anyone what kind of world they're living in, because he's seen it up close as a soldier. Obviously, Nomad calls him crazy, and Ultron rebuts by saying that the alternative is becoming the first victim of this new change. But keep in mind, This is the state of Captain America that would be the most vulnerable to such a deal. I mean, yes, his morals are the strongest, but look where it's gotten him. Post-Sokovia Accords. This is where the next participant's vote comes into play. The players have two options. One, Steve Rogers saves his own life by joining Ultron. Or two, he accepts the privilege of being the first one to be converted, which means essentially could mean killing out Captain America without death. The players voted for Nomad's refusal, and rightfully so if you ask me. Nomad tries to trick Ultron into thinking he's about to break the news to tell him that he's going to say yes, and then tries to go for a cheap shot, which Ultron was completely ready for. It's almost insulting to think Ultron would have considered that possibility. He responds to such by beating Nomad pretty badly, to the point of incapacitation. Next, Ultron fires at the entire group with a Stark missile, throws Steve to the ground right beside the Ultrex, and says, now let there be light. The bomb goes off. Stark is able to spawn an energy shield to protect those around, minus Steve. Meanwhile, a dark haze descends upon the city, an enormous swarm of nanobots carrying microscopic symbiote samples, taken from the symbiotes that the Guardians brought to fight on Earth, sets off to transform every man, woman, and child into horrible metal monstrosities. Nomad seems to be changing far slower than everyone else, perhaps as a result of the super soldier serum. Despite the hero's best efforts, Ultron did it. The Ultrex was set off shortly after he made his offer to Steve, and whether or not the former Avenger agreed, the god of this new world returned to his base, and is now patiently waiting for their arrival as they defend themselves and the city from conversions and attacks from the converted. The question is, what's up his sleeve now? As the heroes fought their way through the city back to Ultron's base, the technological terror was preparing for a climactic final showdown against the blasphemous Avengers. Ultron cherishes being able to have the last laugh and introduces the gang to the Starkbuster, rather than being able to take down one big villain such as the Hulk. The Starkbuster is able to take on entire superhero teams, such as the Avengers, but before he can get started, the arm and shoulder is displaced by a yellow beam. Ultron expresses his aggravation as he watches the same beam carve out a piece of wall from the other side. Ultron demands that the individual responsible show themselves. As the footsteps approach, the same beam pulses Ultron once again, this time in the face. Vision enters, wishing he would have known about this sooner. He's ready for his rematch. Stark says that he thinks they're all ready. Ultron regrows his limbs. Cyber Venom recovers before being eaten alive by the Carnage symbiote and bonding to its machinery for the final battle. It's the team against the Ultron Starkbuster and Cyber Carnage. In the end, they all work together, managing to defeat Ultron and his converted companions, deactivating and restoring the ones that were converted. However, this also caused a huge mess in the world of Spider-Man that also needs cleaning, as he gets a call from Harry about how Ultron's incident affected the testing units. This sets up the next event as more Spider-Man focused. The event that follows, Fatal Web, is just as iconic, if not more iconic, than Ultron Genesis. It's a natural sequel to its predecessor, and I'm glad to be talking about it post-Thunderbolts. There have been a lot of talk about what Spidey or Daredevil must have went through when Void attacked New York. Well, Fatal Web is a perfect example of one event leading to another in a shared universe, rather than those paths never actually crossing over. In Fatal Web, Spider-Man has to get back to the neighborhood to deal with the end result of Ultron's actions. Norman bursts out of Oscorp Tower as the Green Goblin. The citizens tune in to watch Spidey in action. Miles and gang can be seen in the crowd. However, the story doesn't follow Spidey as he defeats the Goblin. Actually, we follow the heroes as they do damage control to round up the converted drones, which leads to the next outbreak, which is a symbiote that was being tested on taking control of Norman's old armor, bringing to life the Red Goblin from the comics, except in this case it's symbiote hosting armor instead of a person. While they deal with that, Spidey is still fighting Goblin. After Red Goblin is taken care of, they immediately take on the next threat, an original character named Dust. He was basically going to be Oscorp's attempt at Sandman, but thanks to the Ultrex, there was contamination that took over and made it a sentient technological sandstorm. The heroes actually have a hard time with this one, but when Star-Lord places a bomb on Dust's back, similar to what he did to Thanos in Infinity War, it gives her an idea. Nomad returns to the scene, leaping into Dust at the center of his chest, impaling him with the Wakandan shield and sliding down, completely dividing him into two sections. But just as they bind back together for the 50th time, a beeping sound can be heard, and suddenly 60% of the subject is disintegrated by a pumpkin bomb. This diminishes the storm enough for the heroes to finish the job. Now that they've dealt with the third villain of this event for them, Stark believes it's a good time to check in on Spidey's progress with the Goblin. Amadeus Cho and Harry Osborn, on the other hand, believe that he should let Peter do his thing. This leads to the next participant vote. Should Iron Man lead the heroes to help Spidey, or should they leave him be? Stark already has a history of doubting Spider-Man and not having the most confidence in him, and this is actually the first time that there's three different outcomes. There's only two choices, but there's a third outcome if the decision would have been unanimous. Unlikely, I know. Majority agrees to let Spidey do his thing, which brings us back to the Goblin fight. Miles, who is watching on the subway train, witnesses Goblin crashing he and Spidey through the roof of the station. Goblin chokes him to the point of his helmet popping off, while Miles is watching. Spidey tells him not to be afraid to give his hero a hand as he gets himself released by tasing Goblin with taser webs, just as Miles steps up and pushes Goblin onto the tracks. Just as a train smashes into him, Spidey thanks him as he heads out to finish the job. Back on Klyntar, Requiem warns Rocket and Groot that after the way they handled Thanos, he won't hold back next time he sees them in order to retrieve the Infinity Stones they have left. Chances are now he's willing to kill them. But ironically enough, Requiem actually walks the two of them straight to Thanos, who is accompanied by a large body of Chitauri. Requiem asks if they should just get this over with, as Thanos extends his arm out, expecting for this to be over quick. Back on Earth, Gamora thinks now would be a good time to return to Klyntar now that the mess has been cleared, except for Goblin. Somehow, someway, this leads to Nomad and start clashing again. Since the Sokovia Accords arc has lasted this long, it's left for plenty of room for these two to continue to show their differences, and it's only gotten worse with each time they interact. This time, however, Nomad almost snaps at Stark to the point where nanobots swarm his eyes, prompting everyone to stand guard. Cho opts to stay in case something happens while everyone else leaves to Klyntar. When they get there, Rocket and Groot are of course not where they were left. The Guardians decide to let Stark and friends take their pod back to Earth while they search the planet. We pick back up with Spider-Man versus the Goblin, and we get a sequence similar, very similar, to the Final Day animation that Marvel MC put out a few years ago. They fight, Goblin gets a lead, doesn't hold back, during which Miles tries to get a closer look, and is bitten by a spider along the way. Spidey regains some upper hand, while Goblin gears his attention toward Miles for a bit. Once he's out of the picture, it becomes a direct one-on-one again, with no distractions. Spidey aims to finish it off by using instant kill mode feature of his Iron Spider armor. But in the moment's notice, it's not Goblin who is killed, it's Peter. That's right. Most people who've already played Marvel MC know that Spider-Man died in this event. That's what makes this event so iconic. It was our first time officially killing off a character, not to mention a character so major. It was also my last day as Peter Parker. Once the character was officially dead in the lore, that also makes the character inaccessible for player use, which is a controversial way to do things, but I might do a video exploring that at a later date. But first, I want to talk about the reception. This was the most affected people have ever been by one of my events. My events are entertaining as they're happening because you're not just reading the events as they unfold, you're also being immersed with it as you participate in what's going on. When this was happening, a lot of us were also in the voice channel for Discord server, reading it together. And as soon as Goblin stabs Spidey in the heart with that Waldo, The first thing I heard was staff member Jackmaster, who was Rock at the time, say, "God damn it, Spy, I knew it!" And Ryan, one of the staff members to use the character Mystique, was like, "Did he actually just die?" When this section of the dialogue was over, a lot of players expressed their sad emotions, and it was sad, but it also let me know that the execution was good. We had a few players who didn't like the idea of Spider-Man dying, whether it be because they loved the character, had high hopes of being him someday. One critique I got was that I shouldn't have killed off Spider-Man in a Spider-Man event because in the MCU he died in Infinity War. And one, that doesn't make sense. Why should characters only be allowed to reach their conclusions in territory that isn't their own? Two, I don't know if I agree that Fatal Web is a Spider-Man event. That was the idea at first glance, but when you think about it, Fatal Web is a direct sequel to Ultron Genesis, which, like I said earlier, is Age of Ultron 2. If anything, while Spider-Man is the titular character and poster boy of the event, it's more of a crossover Avengers event, if anything. Kind of like how Civil War was part of the Captain America trilogy, but felt more like an Avengers movie. It should have been Avengers 2.5. The sequence ends with a "if I die" protocol enacting, which alerts Stark as soon as he arrives back to Earth while he makes his way over there. Goblin tries to get Miles next, who rushes to the creature, blowing his arm off even with his electroshock ability. The Goblin flees. Miles tends to Spider-Man, and of course, it's already too late. Iron Man gets there, fires a warning shot at Miles, prompting him to leave. Stark approaches the body, getting the confirmation that he wishes wasn't so. Picks up Peter and rises from the sewers, revealing to the world what has happened. Followed by Harry and Cho making it to the scene to learn for themselves. And that crowd is Miles, who accepts what is and makes his way home. In the post-credit scene, which was viewed as final hope for a happy ending at the time, is just Tony Stark dropping off a flash drive containing the "if I die" protocol to Aunt May, a video Peter made in preparation for his death. For those that are wondering, this death is supposed to be permanent. When I wrote his death, I made no plans to bring him back, and Peter Parker has been dead for about 6 years now. Technically, there was one way for him to come back, and that was during Game of Stones, when the Peacekeepers were believed to be the winners of the match, before we actually dissected the logs and determined that it was a false call. Beta Ray Bill, who snapped with the Infinity Stone, did attempt to wish for Peter Parker to be brought back. But canonically, it wouldn't make sense. Now, if they had given the stones to Iron Man, who was on the same team, then that would have literally been a perfect conclusion and an amazing way to bring back Spider-Man. Such a shame that we were this close. Now, this begs the question, if characters who are canonically dead in the lore aren't accessible, then doesn't that mean that characters like Odin, Yondu, and plenty of other characters shouldn't be playable, if we're following the logic that everything pre-Infinity War in the MCU is Marvel MC canon? Well, the rule for that is the lore has to acknowledge that death in order for it to take effect. So if Odin, for example, were to appear in a future event in the capacity in which he's alive, then that would suggest that he had to have been revived somehow. If he's merely referenced as a character that has died, then the character would officially be declared dead. But as of right now, since Marvel MC has had its own lore, Odin has not been canonically proclaimed dead or alive. So until then, he's presumed accessible as a character on the server. However, in What More Could We Lose, his MCU death is alluded to in an intro to the event that isn't canon. This is more of a what-if storyline. What if the MCU Thanos snap, which arguably affected Thor the most, took such a toll on him that he went mad and became a villain? The event is very sparsely canon, So I'm going to go over it as quickly as I can and then explain which specific parts are canon. Because rather than the event taking after a Marvel MC story that preceded it, like all the other ones, this one takes after an MCU timeline, and then our timeline takes certain elements from that. Basically, we reminisce about the time in Infinity War when Rocket and Thor are having a man-to-man on the pod on their way to Nidavellir, where he says if he's wrong about Thanos' impending defeat, then what more could he lose? Then fast forward to the snap, as bodies start dusting, it was also avoidable had Thanos acted differently. As soon as he witnesses the last body dust on the field, he storms out of Wakanda, dashing all the way back to New York. When the heroes are still alive to find him, they try their best to cheer him up. He's highly unresponsive, however. Rocket eventually manages to get him to start talking, and he goes over everything that happened in that moment and where he went wrong. The second it was time to finish him off, he went through a series of flashes. His mother, his father, his sister, Heimdall, and Loki, the last two of which Thanos were directly responsible for. The Avengers get emotional. They feel his pain as he goes on to tell them that they got past him, that all it took was a snap of his fingers when getting the last words in with Thanos. And while they try to encourage him as the world goes into a crisis, his mind is unfortunately already made up. He grows angrier as he accepts that they've lost, permanently, and that was all his fault. But something flips inside of him when he does that. He barters out of the new Avenger facility and ponders what happens when he sends the other half of the universe straight to the devil. He takes one big leap into the air and slams the Stormbreaker into the ground as hard as he can, bringing down several huge lightning bats with him. Now it becomes Avengers vs. Thor. While the players who participated in this event did get to fight a Thor NPC, canonically the Avengers lost this fight. Perhaps if Banner was actually able to turn into Hulk and the Shark wasn't on Titan, it would have ended differently. But anywho, Thor prevails and storms directly off planet. This leads us to the next participant vote. How should the Avengers get to space? But this was a bit of a dud. It's more of a multi-choice with only one right answer, and the players have to keep picking until they pick the right one. Eventually they get to, and please forgive me for this one, Elon Musk, who was of no help on such short notice during a time of crisis, but was able to inform them that Stark had just entered the atmosphere. They quickly return to the facility, where the Minotaur is being brought in by Captain Marvel. This gives them a method of transportation to use. They opt to go to Sakaar first, one of the places Hulk and Thor were at. We're then shown the post-credit scene of Thor Ragnarok play out. The twist is that after Grandmaster calls the tie between he and his fighters, they start to slowly approach him, all at once. Grandmaster tries to play off the potential danger that he's in, and starts to hold his arms out, slowly lifting them up. This implies that he has more capabilities than he lets on, but before we're able to see how that would have played out, Thor dashes over them, lightning fast. This distracts everyone, and Grandmaster has just this person to get the job done. He declares Bill, as in Beta Ray Bill, the acting champion. Everyone circles around the two as they begin to brawl. The Avengers arrive just in time to give Bill a hand. However, Bill turns his attention away from Thor and onto them, viewing them as a threat. This leads to the Avengers versus Bill. They eventually floor him, but Thor interferes, erasing all of their progress. He immediately takes out the likes of Nomad, Widow, War Machine, and even shuts down the Hulkbuster. Master commands Bill to get up and continue fighting, but Thor says otherwise. He intends to do some serious damage to Beta, but is interrupted by Captain Marvel, who arrives late at the scene in binary mode. Upon physical contact with a fully powered Captain Marvel, ready to put an end to the fatality going on here on Sakaar, Thor began fusing with a similar power that omega-ted into his own electricity. It's almost like he was draining power from Captain Marvel. Thor finds himself amused by this occurrence, declaring it just what he needs. He even storms away with her in tow, and charges them both right back into the planet's surface at high velocity. Everyone takes cover. Needless to say, a lot of damage was done, but Grandmaster doesn't mind. In fact, he's impressed and offers Thor something for promotion now that he sees their potential. This puzzles Thor long enough for Bill to capitalize, or at least attempt to, Keep in mind, this store is fused with Captain Marvel's power, which come from the Space Stone. So Bill's strike does absolutely nothing. Thor responds by knocking out both he and the Grandmaster himself. During this, Rocket dragged the unconscious Captain Marvel to safety, just in time for her to regain consciousness. They come up with a plan, and that's to use Danvers' powers to counteract the same signature of power that is now a part of Thor. Rocket represents an IPU, and explains to them that it's capable of harnessing the Infinity Stone. In this case, it should be capable of containing Danvers' powers. All she has to do is perform her powers into it long enough. The catch is Danvers would essentially make it to where she won't have anything left in her to be in this battle, and lo and behold, it works. They managed to turn their IPU into an infinite photon blaster, which should neutralize Thor. So now, the Avengers are up against Plethor, a version of Thor with a greater plethora of powers, and hopefully they're able to get a shot at him with their new device. Thor, as menacing as ever, doesn't hold back. He's even able to easily deal with Captain Marvel like she's just another Captain America to him. War Machine threatens him with a Stark missile, and Thor scoffs at the idea of it being able to do anything to him. So, he challenges him to do so, which is when Rocket climbs onto War Machine's shoulders and fires the Infinite Photon Blaster, dead on. A huge explosion in Captain Marvel's plethora energy shone at Thor, draining him not only of the energy he consumed from her, but also of the raging electricity that's been frying his brain into madness in the first place. The Avengers took him to Wakanda's medical facility, where he took Bucky's place in the same coma-like state. So, before we get to the post-credit scene, here's what's canon and what's not canon. Obviously, anything taking after Infinity War is not Marvel MC canon. That's just a template used to tell a good story. However, this incident with Thor did happen, just not in the heat of a Thanos snap. This would be after One Last Stone and before Redemption. But if you remember, Thanos reveals in Redemption that he preemptively took care of the possibility that Captain Marvel would be an issue for him by stuffing her into the Soul Realm. However, he did imply that it was possible for her to escape. He might have also been implying that she managed to do just that a time or two. This would also have to be during one of those times. The inspiration that we took from the Ragnarok post-credit scene with Grandmaster is canon, but I wouldn't view it as a here's what happened directly after that film, but rather here's what eventually happened once they were able to track down the Grandmaster. One thing I want to get across is that the MCU plays humble when it comes to the Collector and Grandmaster. As Elders of the Universe, they're very extremely powerful individuals. I believe they're strong as ego. So this event kind of implies that with Grandmaster and the events that follow should do the same with his brother. One thing I do differently is I try to give Beta Ray a bit more credit. I mean, this event was co-written by Paladin32, a staff member at the time who was iconic as Bill on the server. So he did have to sign off on what we came up with. He had a huge influence on the interpretation as well as what we did with Thor in this event. But if I could do it over again, I'd have the character appear a bit stronger. I mean, a statue of his head is on the Battle Dome, yet it's his official introduction to the lore, and all we see is him getting beat by Thor after not doing much of anything. There are two ways to explain this. One, it could have been weakened, since that's what happens to these characters when they arrive on Sakaar. Two, Thor is the strongest he's ever been. He's a god, plus the Infinity Stone. But I think in spite of that, Bill should not have been the equivalent of a bodyguard for the Grandmaster to get in Thor's way by giving him a mildly hard time. Like I said, my writing is not perfect, it continues to evolve, but I do believe that this is a solid story with an amazing resolution at the end. In the post-credit scene, Tony takes Aunt May to Peter's hospital room to see the condition that he's in. Tony laments having to feel as though he let the kid get to this point. Miles at home sees the headlines on TV and sheds a tear. He then proceeds to take a Spider-Man dress-up costume out of his closet and makes it his own with art supplies before leaving out the window. This marks the announcement of Avenge Me, the next event. This one actually wasn't planned, but after Spider-Man died, a few players suggested an event dedicated to letting them get their revenge on the Goblin. So I wrote it, and inserted it into the schedule. And it's very simple. It recaps the events of Fatal Web and then follows Amadeus Cho as he checks on Tony. Cho expresses his guilt. He feels like even though they all agreed that Peter had it under control, that at the very least he should have been more collaborative with Spidey. As a fellow Spider friend himself, he even says that Peter's the one who gave him the 16Z, which is the Iron Spider suit that Amadeus wears. Here he also checks in on Tony via video call. We then catch up with Miles after he exits his window, and he eventually tracks down Norman through a drug cartel. He botches his latest attempt at using his powers to extract information, but it actually ends up making him look tougher, more intimidating. So he gets a lead, but before he can get all of it, Iron Man scares them off. Stark is impressed that he's been able to come as far as he has in his investigation so quickly after Spidey's death, and quickly realizes that Miles is the kid that was there when it happened. He relays to Stark that one of the dealers were saying something about a king that Norman was in cahoots with around the same time. But what king? King of Wakanda? The Uptown Block Kings from Cloak and Dagger? Cho drops down and asks if either of them knows where he can find Kingpin. This takes them to the top floor of Fisk Tower, where Wilson Fisk is mourning the loss of his family. They catch him off guard, taking him down immediately, demanding answers regarding the whereabouts of Norman Osborn. He insists on not saying anything, but does point them in the right direction by telling them to look at the security surveillance, which shows the Goblin on the roof of the facility, still recovering. They leave Fisk be, but on the way out, Cho beams his arm off, causing him to pass out from blood loss. They head to the roof and confront Goblin, who doesn't have anything to say. It's Iron Man, Tony Stark, Iron Spider, Amadeus Cho, and Miles Morales, the new Spider-Man, against the man who killed the OG, and all the players who were there got a piece of him. This event actually doesn't have a wrap-up scene, nor a post scene, so it's left ambiguous how things ended, whether or not Norman was killed, same for whether or not Kingpin survived having his arm amputated. Another thing left to the imagination, probably for the better, is how things end for Peter in the hospital. It's implied that he died in the hospital due to his heart injuries, that he clearly wasn't going to make it out of the moment they happened in his final battle. There is one thing I would do differently with this event, however, and that's to not include political social commentary. I didn't elaborate on it in the recap, but basically, I perpetuated the evil white man rules all ideology. The idea that if a white man is successful, he has to do evil things to get there, especially make life harder for others by putting obstacles in their way, particularly black people. This conspiracy is promoted on certain news networks, written into film and television, and everyone's meant to soak it up, especially impressionable young people who then have it internalized by the time they're adults. I was 5 years younger than I am now when this event came out, and back then I was too young to even notice the modern feminist narrative being perpetuated in Captain Marvel. This isn't what I would write today. I said this in one of my own videos, but we watch stuff for the story, not the commentary that is shoved into that. The same logic applies here. The story of my events is it being analyzed to make sure I imitate life a certain way with certain narratives. And I mean, I didn't face backlash for this. I'm not even sure anyone noticed, but going forward, I will not be doing that. Anyways, the event that followed is called Forged by Iron. I'm going to skip the recap for this event because it's basically just a side-by-side origin story for Captain America and Iron Man. In other words, it plays out the first Iron Man film as well as Captain America the First Avenger. It's just a bit rewritten to fit our format, but we didn't do anything different in a way that's important to the greater story being told. However, it does tease Civil War at the end by having the two heroes bicker in an argument that ends badly. Shout out to Arget for co-writing this one with me. For now though, I'm very excited to recap an event called Him, as in Adam Warlock. This is an origin story event that I'm truly excited to go over. It has everything one can ask for. It organically introduces a fan favorite character. It depicts something that would go on to happen in the MCU. It has the Guardians, important relics, etc. Spinning off right after the events of Fatal Web, the Guardians of the Galaxy leave the Klyntar planet empty-handed. Months later, as they fall into their original routines, they receive a call from their standalone member, Agent Venom, who's requesting immediate aid from his fellow teammates. This brings the Guardians back to a former enemy called the Sovereigns, and when they arrive at the scene, Thompson is surrounded by dead Sovereigns. Thompson informs them that they have a problem, and refers to the birthing pod that we saw at the end of Guardians Volume 2. The issue he claims is that this one in particular was actually designed by the Enclaves, a group of scientists from Earth, who were then given an idea of how things went down. From them tracking down the cocoon, presumably for harvestation, to one of the trackers, who is secretly one of the original creators, turning their back on the group to destroy it before it's too late to do anything about what comes out, which ironically accelerates his emergence. When he makes his entrance, he immediately senses the true evil nature of his creator's plans, and thus immediately turns his back on them. In a premature stage, his creators warn him that if he draws enough energy to leave the planet as he desires to do, he could inadvertently pull too much, causing an overload that will destroy them all. He then uses the iconic line from the comics, "Does the tiger concern himself about to flee?" and then proceeds to leave, wiping him out in the process, the creators. The only survivor was Alicia, a blind woman that tasked with finding where the cocoon was planted. She passed on everything she knew to the agents above her, but the destruction that he left is basically all the evidence there is. As Thompson finishes telling the story, they ask if it has a name. That's when Aisha steps in, letting them know that his name is Adam, for deploying a backup fleet of Sovereigns from cryogenic freeze. By the time the Guardians are done fighting them, Aisha has not only bailed, but encased the birthing pod in Uru, the same metal that created Thanos' sword. With this in mind, they don't even bother to try to get through it. But they do still need answers to know how to deal with Adam before he comes out again. Thompson believes the Collector would be a good source. While they make their way over there, we're shown how Adam once became part of the Collector's collection. Adam Warlock's cocoon was actually not only a post-credit scene in Guardians 2, but he was also in Tiven's collection as an Easter egg in Guardians 1. This event also explains how these are actually both the same cocoon, in addition to revealing that it was actually originated from Earth. After he left the planet, he dashes into space, eventually stumbling upon Asgard, where Thor is with Sif, as he was just about to head to Earth to see about the mess that was just made. When Adam, arrives in the middle of their conversation, they share a disagreement on the nature of mankind. Thor holds them in high regard. Adam thinks they're the lowest of the low due to their greed, and for some strange reason, he finds himself drawn to Sif, wanting to choose her to be his mate. She compares him to a child, and Thor claims her to be his own. Adam persists, he grabs Sif, and flees once again. Thor would have retaliated if not for him having Sif in tow. At his next destination, he finds himself at Exitar, the mining colony that exists within nowhere. It's not explicitly stated that this is nowhere, even though it clearly is, so I don't know how colonized nowhere is at this point, or if it's at a point in time where it's just the miners doing their thing before it actually becomes some kind of hub. The place stops him in his tracks. He's amused, and asks Sif if she knows this place. She warns him that Thor has connections here, so that he might want to put her down. When they enter, they make conversation. He informs her of his recent birth, and she does sympathize with him, but only to trick him into meeting a friend of Thor's who is in the area, the Collector. As soon as he gets there, the Collector immediately blasts him. Thor is also there to see it happen, and is ready to finally take Adam on. However, when he hurls Mjolnir at him, he doesn't budge, not even a flinch. But Thor is able to get the job done if he uses his bare hands. Adam traps Sif in an aerospace, and the two fight it out with her as the prize. He ultimately loses the fight and retreats back into his cocoon in response. Thor tries to use Mjolnir again to stop the sheets of it from reforming, but Tiffin stops him, says that it won't be necessary. He then calls for Karina, his assistant, to assist them in bringing the cocoon into one of their empty chambers. When the Guardians arrive, they ask Tiffin how the cocoon came into the Sovereign's possession when it was in his collection. He makes it very simple, which is that after the explosion caused by his previous assistant grabbing the Power Stone, he had to revamp the entire museum. During the arrival of Ronan and his forces, due to the call Drax made, nowhere became a playing field for looters. His collection was a victim of it. Some things were stolen, some were sold, and some of the escapees took some of his belongings with them. The cocoon falls into the category of sold, as in he had to sell it to be able to start his collection from scratch. Years later was when he learned that the High Empress intends to not only use it for evolution, but to raise that new generation to eliminate the Guardians of the Galaxy. Peter informs Tiffin that the cocoon has evolved since it's been in the collection, and that they need to stop Aisha before the situation can get any worse. The Collector offers his services, saying that he should be able to get through the metal that they speak of. He entrusts them to go on and find what they call the Sovereign Plan, and intends to catch up with them. But during the time since their last visit, the Sovereigns have managed to unleash an obelisk that they've tamed, serving as the perfect distraction for when they arrive. This was an interesting boss fight because it's not a humanoid figure, it's an interdimensional beast with very large reach. They tried to make things quick by using the same method as before, which is by going after a weak spot in the neck. However, it's been patched with the same metal that the cocoon was cased in. Gamora learns this the hard way when she tries to pierce it with the God's Lair. She winds up dangling the sword from all it's jammed onto the middle. Thompson tries to restrain the creature with it by a symbiote grip while telling Gamora to let it go. Gamora doesn't listen. Instead, she doubles down by seeing if jamming her switchblade in the same spot would be of any help. The obelisk tears free from the grip, which flings Thompson out of range and sends Gamora upwards. Thor manages to save Agent Venom from being launched into space, basically, but Gamora, unfortunately, is caught in the obelisk's mouth. Drax tries to pull another insane kill it from the inside, dumb move, but it's thankfully interrupted when the Collector arrives, using his power primordial ability to shatter the metal, immediately killing the obelisk. They head inside to find the cocoon so that Tiffin can rinse and repeat the process, but it's unfortunately gone. The team is torn between whether or not to look for the pod in the event that Adam has been hatched, or to use this time to research the facility and see if there's anything they can learn about their plans to go ahead in that way. This leads us to the next participant vote. Stay at the Sovereign and utilize their materials and everything there's to know about what lies within the birthing pod, or track down said pod before it's too late. There's also the option to split the team into two parties. One half does this, one half does the other. The players voted for option 1, which is to hang tight and research. I actually pulled up the old logs for this one, and they had a good discussion. The consensus was that while 3 does sound good, if Adam is hatched when they catch up with him, going up against it with half of a team could be quite risky. So that's what the Guardians do, and they learn a few things in the process. For one, the Soviets hire chambermaid translators to communicate with allied species, such as the friendly obelisk. They can also communicate with the species that don't have the option to talk, presumably even unborn species, such as Adam. This suggests that Aisha may have already built a relationship with Adam, despite not having properly met him yet. Meanwhile, Gamora updates Agent Venom on what's been going on with the team as it pertains to Rocket and Groot, and her sister. Things that I just covered not too long ago. But new information is presented, which is that Mantis informed them that there's one last place on Klyntar that they didn't look. They plan to go back and check it out once this whole Adam thing is dealt with. If they're unsuccessful, however, Then Gamora fears that they might not be found anymore, which is why she urges Thompson to start sticking around more instead of being the only independent guardian of the galaxy. She even asks him why he decided to go that route. He says it's because there was a conflict between he and Nebula. Gamora then starts having flashbacks to the time Thanos said, "Some time ago, your sister snuck aboard this ship to kill me. She very nearly succeeded, so I brought her here." Followed by an off-panel argument that was had during the event of all distress. It's having Nebula press Thompson for the Infinity Stone that he had at the time. She claims that it's safer with her and therefore should be in her possession. Thompson says that it was appointed to him because he was proven most trustworthy of it during the Battle of Redemption. Nebula insists that they were wrong. Thompson calls her out on her biased judgment and how her relationship with her father is at the center of it all. She ends with saying that she'll find quote-unquote another way. Had he known Nebula never reunited with the team, he would have had no reason to not stick around. When Gamora snaps back, the Guardians hear something coming from where Star-Lord went with Drax. While Thompson, Mantis, and Gamora rush their way over to them, Tiven is sitting in the central area of the facility, fidgeting with a tiny box laced in red, waiting, ready for anything. At the scene, they come across a Peter who has been shot in the head through his space mask, lying next to Drax that has his own dagger lodged into their chest. Drax is dead, Quill. Quill, not just yet. He tells Gamora that he loves her, and then drops. Thompson notices Aisha is now present, and asks her if she was responsible. Aisha says that actually someone seems to have done the work for them. She then calls for Adam, who steps into the scene, no longer in his cocoon. He introduces himself by blasting Mantis in the skull, who falls straight on her back. This leads to a boss fight between Aisha and Adam. Gamora and Thompson fail to take down the two, and Tiv is nowhere to be seen. Aisha gains upper hand on Gamora while she and Thompson are trying to gang up on Adam. While Adam deals with Thompson, it nears the end of the line for them as well. In fact, when Aisha is about to shoot Gamora in the head, instead, it's her that is blasted in the head by a mysterious red energy. Her remains turn to a red dust, which instantly vanishes. This is when the Collector emerges from a red loop, holding what is now clearly the Reality Stone. From that point, everything else that is not a part of reality comes to light. Gamora's wounds goes away, and the current setting completely wipes and replaces itself with where the Collector presumably was this entire time, on the roof of the Sovereign Palace, where Star-Lord is holding Adam over a cliff, and Drax is sitting on Aisha, which explains why they hear gaps and wheezing. No one is actually killed. Star-Lord demands answers for Adam, who is at risk of being thrown off a cliff. He explains that he left the Enclaves because they didn't have good intentions, which is backwards, that he finds himself sort of supporting Aisha, which leads them to believe that Aisha must not have told him anything about her intentions. She tries to gaslight him, but Mantis puts her to sleep. The Collector then introduces him to the Sovereign plans. Adam's in denial at first, but in the end, it's clear that their intentions are well documented in their facilities. This leads to Adam no longer being a fan of Aisha, and sides with them when the fleet of Omnicrafts appear to get their revenge. With Adam's help, and Tiven actually being more active during the battle, they take down the fleet with no issues. Aisha arises, however, one last time, deeming this not over yet. Mantis puts her to sleep again, and Gamora manages to get a headshot on Aisha with her own weapon as she tumbles down. Tiven heads on his way, and Adam asks his fellow Guardians where they're headed next. Star-Lord answers this by asking Mantis when the next cave opening is on Klyntar. And that's the Adam Warlock origin story event, with special appearances from Thor, Sif, Age of Venom, and the Collector. Not to mention a sprinkle of Thanos, as per usual. The only thing I want to say is that Aisha's fate has been left ambiguous.
In the post-dialogue, the Guardians pay Tiffin a visit at his museum to sell him something he might be interested in. But they're interrupted when he gets an anonymous call from someone offering him billions of units to buy the Reality Stone. The next event, First Light, is another flashback event. I'm going to skip this event for similar reasons as to why I skipped Forged by Iron. It's basically just a Cloak and Dagger origin story event, and it's almost identical to the TV series, so I'm going to quickly summarize how that show goes. Two kids living two completely different lives find themselves in a lake when an oil rig explodes. One's infected by dark force energy, the other's infected by light force energy. These two energies both conflict with one another and rely on each other, which leads to two kids saving each other from dying that night. Then they go back to living separate lives and don't bump into each other until their teens. In their adolescence, they come to understand their relationship with their individual powers as it relates to their life challenges, and come together as old comrades and counterparts as yin and yang, more or less. It's a very brief summary, but that's the gist of it. To get the full picture, watch the show. I strongly recommend it, strongly. However, there are a few differences worth noting. In the event, Spider-Man is the one who saves Ivan Hess from the rig. He's there in New Orleans on a school trip. In the show, the antagonists are the corporation responsible for the explosion, and the individuals responsible for Cloak and Dagger, or Tandy and Tyrone, being there when it happened. In the event, however, the villain is Martin Lee, a victim of the explosion that no one ever knew about. Martin Lee is portrayed as this optimistic, happy-go-lucky, wholesome guy, even in some contexts in which you wouldn't expect someone to be so bright. But since the explosion, he would have these episodes, causing him to become someone else. That someone else is Mr. Negative, who has the opposite personality, callous, selfish, pessimistic, and he has a vendetta against Spider-Man for not saving him. The climax of the event is when Tandy and Tyrone bump into each other when they're older, and the cat and mouse game leads to them being at the wrong place at the wrong time, and as a result, they bump into Mr. Negative, and are forced to take him on. It's a Doctor Strange moment, where they go from being naive of their powers to immediately masterful at them at just the right time. In other words, it tries to tell a whole story inspired by only one episode of the show, instead of it being inspired by the whole season and including all elements that are important to that story. It ends with the police arriving, which scares off Mr. Negative's crooks as he transitions back. And the police, of course, assume that Tandy and Tyrone are harassing Martin Lee. They manage to get away, but the innocent personality returns just in time to play the victim and pass along Tyrone's identification to the police that he must have dropped unless he was pickpocketed, which leads to Tyrone being wanted by the police. That's the cliffhanger. So those who've seen the show can kind of see that it takes after it, but it tries to do some things different in a way that's just too rushed. So my plans for this event is to mostly rearrange the sequence of events. I'm not retconning it, but I am scrapping the way it was presented. The Spider-Man tie-in is still there. The original origin stories of Cloak and Dagger is still there in the way it played out in the show. And Martin Lee / Mr. Negative's origin is still in there. However, for the sake of character development, this did not unfold as quickly as it did. So imagine everyone involves development as something that played out over the course of one season of the show, with Mr. Negative as a B-plot, until he eventually gets into it with Cloak and Dagger at some point in the finale, without him being directly responsible for Tyrone's wanted status. In the post-dialogue, however, we return to Peter Parker's hospital room, where he receives a couple of guests. These guests, however, didn't have to sign any papers to get in. Cloak asks Dagger what she thinks, and she says, comatose. just as she thought. This was a small error. I meant catatonic, like what Ivan Hess was, not comatose. They aren't exactly the same thing. They get mixed up. Cloak follows it up with, "So, does that mean we're doing this?" "Definitely," she says. "Well, you know the drill. You grab one hand, I grab the other." I wonder what this might lead to. People who've watched the show might have an idea. But before we address that cliffhanger, first let's address the one from earlier that teased Civil War. I'm going to do the same thing with this event that I just did with First Light. I'm sure most people watching this video have seen Captain America Civil War, so while I am going to go over the event, I'm only going to dive into the parts that are different. The first objective is simple. After recapping the argument that Steve has with Tony, the players are asked to take 10 minutes to discuss the debate. Team Cap or Team Stark? I made a video sharing my side years ago, but I'll quickly go over it here as well. I believe that although Team Cap is correct, that I also believe Team Stark is the smartest route to go. Vision said it best. There's right and wrong, but there's also what's best for the collective good. I believe that shifting the blame is actually a wise decision. In the Amazing Spider-Man 2 video game, when you're saving citizens from fire, you have to save all of them. Not at least one, not most, all of them. And if you don't, it's considered a failed mission, which affects your vigilante status. And when that meter is in red, you're viewed as no different than the bad guys. And the task force will attack you while you're swinging through the city. If the accords are signed, however, you become a product of the government, and then they're to blame, not you. You get to succeed or fail without having to have consequences for not being perfect at all times. It's just a better move to make. But morally speaking, I don't think altruism should be politicized or made into another government branch. Liberty should always be the idea, not restriction. And notice how I went with the route of, okay, this objective is to have a good discussion, a good productive dialogue with each other, not just another battle. That's because those can be really underrated. On a server like Marvel MC, sometimes being able to talk about the lore as it pertains to like a practical matter that could actually happen, and have those complex discussions about it, it's really interesting. It's really fun. So I'm impressed that Marvel's able to have that generational long discussion that intrigues people. Same with Stone Surge. I'm glad that the auction played out the way that it did at Game of Stones. So not everything is going to be about battles, and I think that's a good thing. Anyways, the next thing that we did different was, what if we got to see Hawkeye recruit Scott Lang to Team Cap? And we combined it with Spider-Man's recruitment by having it start out with Hawkeye surveillance Lang as he's about to rob the Parker residence, not knowing what he's up against due to who lives there. Hawkeye eventually intervenes on the occasion by hitting Spidey with a sleepy arrow and collecting Scott before Stark arrives to recruit Peter. I'm not going to keep this as canon. I don't think we needed this, and I think it's too hard to take seriously also. However, the next mention that we did differently is that right before the two teams are about to collide after a bit of clashing at the airport, Thor arrives right in the middle of it. They catch up to speed, and while he does suggest the idea of signing the papers so that no one blames them, he's also disappointed to learn that there's tension when there is so much going on out there in the universe. What they've experienced so far is only a taste. He then goes on to name a few of those things, referring to the recent events of Guardians of the Galaxy, hinting at Galactus, the Nihilists, etc. Thor's visit was led by his intentions to get the team back together so that they can take it all on, get ahead of the big one. But clearly, they're ill-prepared, so he leaves them to resume his journey alone. But since this is such a polarizing issue, it has no bearing on either one's position on the matter. So the battle resumes as they continue to fight for the side of the cause they believe in. And then the rest of the event continues as normal, right on par with the rest of the movie. The post-dialogue is just our interpretation of the moment Thanos decided to let Loki use his scepter. In 2012, the Mad Titan sits on his throne, waiting for the other to report. He grabs his scepter, leading to a memory he has of Nebula staring the scepter down. She then has a bit of a startle when she notices Thanos standing behind her. Her jolting unintentionally triggered a holographic image projection, all satellite footage of the main Avengers. He doesn't say anything, so Nebula just leaves. Thanos gives the other the scepter for Loki to use, as he has other matters to tend to. Now, at last, it's finally time to go over what's kind of the last event in the phase. Quest for Requiem is essentially the endgame of the first phase. Here's a speedrun of what's led to this point. Groot loses the space stone on Klyntar, causing he and Rocket to go back alone. Thanos gets his hand on it before they do, leading Rocket to pull a fast one on him so that they can get away without having to surrender their other two stones, power and time. When they retreat, they meet Requiem, a mysterious hooded figure who tells the duo to come with them if they want to live. But ironically enough, this meant taking them directly to Thanos, seemingly to give up the stones all willy-nilly. So what happened after that? Well, let's find out. When Thanos extends his arm out, presumably to receive the stones, Requiem clarifies to him that that's actually not what they're there for. Not to make Rocket hand over the Power Stone, and not to make Groot hand over the Time Stone. Thanos naturally perceives this as they've actually chosen the hard way. So he returned to signal the Chitauri to handle this issue for him, but it's interrupted when Requiem says, "I'm just here to kill you," as they impale him through the chest with a special sword, followed by swinging it through his neck, decapitating him. As Thanos is beheaded, the gauntlet slides right off his hand as his head rolls right in front of his army. Being the one who killed their master, Requiem inherits the Chitauri, but they then say, "I have no need for you," and then kills all of them with poisonous gas. They even put on the gauntlet and use a space stone to split the atoms of the Chitauri ship, causing a big atomic explosion. Rocket and Groot by this point are long gone. Rocket does some cheering up for Groot, who is a little shooken up by what he saw. But at the same time, while Rocket is ready to build a spaceship and do whatever he has to get Groot off that planet and find the Guardians, Groot is eager to obtain the Space Stone back. You see, since they have power and time, it's an even match against Requiem, who presumably has soul in space after defeating Thanos. They're willing to barter, or battle, even at the risk of someone going home empty-handed. But before they get to it, Rocket asks Groot if he even has an IPU for the Time Stone. Groot responds by growing a place for it right on top of his head, and it locks right in. Rocket doesn't even bother to ask, and decides to get a move on. They fight a few symbiote scrolls along the way. The Guardians arrive just in time to witness the atomic explosion in Klyntar's orbit. Adam says that he feels a strong presence down there. When they arrive, the lingering poisonous gas clears as they see the dead Chitauri, followed by an empty Infinity Gauntlet. And even further, a dead, headless Thanos. Gamora calls it a trap and urges the team to get out of there. Adam says otherwise, that it's real as he feels Titan's soul, but not within its body. He opts to retrieve the gauntlet before anyone else does, but as soon as he starts going over to it, Gamora grabs Adam by the arm, trying to stop him. She's essentially starting to freak out, trying to make sense of what this whole ordeal is. She suggests the possibility that Tivin recently sold the Reality Stone, which could be capable of creating an illusion that could supersede even his intuitions. On that note, she insists that they should leave before he manages to take them down. Agent Thompson exits the ship late as he was napping, asking for clarity. "We must leave before who takes us down?" Gamora replies with Thanos, says that he's there somewhere, that she can feel it. According to Adam, he's now been able to identify that the strong presence he's been feeling is a soul stone, something the reality stone is no match for. He believes that he may have a bond with it. Her freakout gets so bad that she whips out the Godslayer and starts swinging it, nearly hitting Warlock, prompting him to knock her off her feet and ask that she be restrained. So Thompson does just that. Well, Adam puts the gauntlet on. But to be on the safe side, Star-Lord pages Captain for backup, as he's not leaving without Rocket and Groot this time. But unfortunately, they've got company, and it's a gang of symbiotes. Adam abruptly flies away right before the fight begins to track down the Soul Stone that he's been obsessing over. By the time the fight is over, Gamora is able to calm down and explains that her father is torturing her as a ghost. When Adam returns, Star-Lord isn't happy with him. Leaving a team at a time like that doesn't leave the best impression when you're a new member. He opts to apologize later when there's less going on, as he gives a strong report on what all that he discovered while searching the planet. He says that he saw symbiotes that had hosts, a hooded figure conspiring with Skrulls, and what he describes as a puppet show of the same species being fought by a sapling and Terran mammal. In other words, he saw Rocket and Groot. This excites the team, restores their hope, gives them the optimism that they'll find Rocket and Groot safe. Gamora asks for a more exact idea of where was that, but Adam believes that their priority should be the hooded figure. Star-Lord is completely against the idea, as they have no clue as to who this person is, and therefore see no reason as to why they would be a priority over their friends. Adam says it's because he saw them in possession of the Space and Soul Stones with a very powerful sword. How do they know Rocket and Groot won't be confronted by this person for the remaining stones? How do they know where their allegiance lies and that they won't bring Thanos back to life? Although Adam is biased, he believes that getting ahead of this individual could mean getting the Space Soul Stone, which will enable them to reverse any lives that are lost. The entire team is eventually on board, so they seek to find the Soul Stone. While they search, we get a flashback where a symbiote Skrull asks Thanos if they should make their way over to Klyntar now. And upon confirmation that all the heroes are gone, he agrees. We then get to see the arrival of Requiem arriving at Nidavellir. This Requiem isn't wearing the gear that we first meet them in. It's also before they obtain their sword, hence why they're there. When a dwarf named Broke greets them, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's spelled B-R-O-K-K, Requiem says that they need a weapon forged, as well as some armor. Broke asks who they correspond with, and Requiem gives them the blueprints, as well as state that the concept was designed by Thanos. Broke is a bit intimidated, but obliges to putting the blueprint in the grid right away, and calls for a much older dwarf named Sindri, letting him know that they have a customer. Requiem pauses Broke, demanding the Master Forger. Broke says that Sindri practically is Master Forger. He used to be the King Dwarf back when the Odinson were kids. Sindri adds that he had a hand in making Thor's Mjolnir. Requiem says that it's not good enough. They'd like the current king on this job. Broke says yes, but that his brother, Eitri, is going to charge extra. Requiem, beginning to lose patience, says to just get him there as they're wasting time. They summon Eitri and hand him the blueprints. He whistles at the complexity of the device, since it's more complex than the Infinity Gauntlet. Eitri says that it'll cost around $500 million. Requiem is not happy with this quote, because they have $4.5 billion, but that they need it for a transaction with the Collector. Broke whispers in Eitri's ear, who then offers $50,000 less at best. They throw in another They throw in other combinations as well, such as allowing it to be fully tested before payment and speeding up the process so that the Requiem can be on their way. Requiem unfortunately pulls Eitri towards them and pins an elbow behind his back before threatening the lives of every dwarf that resides on Nidavellir, unless they comply to harnessing their device and armor, which they comply with. Requiem then wields their new Infinity Blade while wearing the newly equipped armor. Now that they have it, Eitri requests that they leave and tells them that there will be no charge. Requiem slits Sentry's throat and tells them to ditch the mold, destroy the blueprints, and tells them that if anyone outside of this ring is made known of their arrival, that there will be more deaths to go around. Back on Klyntar, in the present day, Adam asks Star-Lord if it's wise to have half of the Infinity Stones within a single small team of individuals. What's even worse is that those 3 stones are only spread between 2 members of that team. Star-Lord's defense is that the small team is more than capable of protecting the stones because they aren't just the Guardians, they're the Guardians of the Galaxy. Since things have calmed down, Adam apologizes for abandoning the team earlier. He says that if he had doubts of their ability to protect one another, he wouldn't have left. However, he would still suggest dividing up the stones more efficiently, such as to their allies. It would prevent the unthinkable, as losing 2 Infinity Stones could leave someone with all the power they need to obtain them all. At last, they find the Soul Stone sitting on a nice podium. Star-Lord ponders if it's really the stone. Adam's connection to it tells him so, but Drax reminds him that he told them he saw a hooded creature with it. Gamora says that they should question this later, but as she reaches over to grab it, suddenly everyone is frozen. Everything around them turns green as a short black creature hops on each of them except for Gamora, shoulder to shoulder, placing some sort of rig on their person. The figure is Rocket, who is seemingly fully possessed by a symbiote. Says, now, he says, as Groot uses his remaining stone to unpause time. Rocket then presses a button triggering the obedience disc, incapacitating each Guardian. Groot knocks Gamora's lights out with his arm formed into a spiked mallet. Earlier that day, after getting done with the symbiote scrolls, Rocket and Groot approach Requiem for their space stone back. Requiem immediately views it as a challenge since the stones are nothing to joke around about. But Rocket reminds him that they have 2 stones, equivalent to as many that they supposedly do. They aren't looking for a fight, they're looking to come to an agreement. He even offers the infinite photon blaster that was used to take down Plethor. But to Requiem, the only agreement that can be made is keeping the Space Stone, taking power and time, and just maybe letting Rocket and Groot walk away with their lives. They then use the Space Stone to deploy a black hole beneath Rocket and Groot. They fall straight in, landing right back where they already were. But Requiem is nowhere in sight. Rocket figures they bailed and opts to leave with Groot, who he realizes is also nowhere to be found. But when he turns to look for him, a giant Groot enchanted with a purple glow growls visually at him. Rocket is terrified, confused as to how Groot got his stone. But before he can do a lot of questioning, Requiem hammers him from behind with the Infinity Blade, nearly knocking him out. As Requiem holds up the blade, a third Infinity Stone comes to light. Reality. Requiem then says, no, you have the 2 Infinity Stones. Or should I say, had. Followed by opening a portal, inviting symbiotes to take over Rocket as he passes out. Rocket's consciousness slowly fades as his eyesight goes black from the symbiotes bonding to him. From the moment the Guardians found the Soul Stone, they set foot in the trap. The true reality is that Rocket and Groot were never actually covered in symbiote, and are actually tied up in a hidden cavern. This is where the Guardians find themselves now. Requiem emerges from a portal and greets the Guardians, now wielding a 4th Infinity Stone. Power. They use the Space Stone to levitate the Guardians up against a wall and into shackles next to their long-lost teammates. Question is, what now? Why is Requiem so determined to not only possess all the Infinity Stones, but to take out every indirect potential threat along the way? Gamora says that if they had all 3 of the stones that they possessed, what more do they want? Why not let them go? Actually, Requiem hasn't been able to take the Time Stone because it's forged into Groot's head, and he can't get it out. When Adam asks what they're needed for, Requiem says that they'll know soon enough, once the Guardians, who were already paged earlier, have arrived at the Mind Stone. Apparently, their plans were also interrupted by not knowing how Groot ended up with both time and space. They were under the impression that Thompson had it. Well, according to Thompson, he did have it until Groot tricked him into gambling it in a game that he pretended to suck at. If he hadn't lost it, their job handling Aisha would have been a lot easier. In real time, Agent Venom lost the Space Stone because when I was Groot, I challenged for it and the stone was yielded to me. This is how we canonically dealt with the transfer. Anyways, Requiem gives them 2 options. Either Groot cooperates and helps Requiem see what's taking the Avengers so long, which they need the Time Stone to do, or Groot loses his head. They cooperate. Requiem reaches out to Groot with the Reality Stone. The Time Stone is used to reach back, which gives a real-time look, see what I did there, at what's happening. On Earth, Doctor Strange is having a spat with Stark and Thor, wanting to know who stole the Time Stone. At last, we have an explanation as to how Groot obtained the Time Stone. He stole it from the Sanctum. There's many different ways this could have happened, and Groot, being the species that he is, leaves different interpretations up in the air as to how he would have responded to any spell that may have been on the Time Stone to protect it. So we're going to leave it at that. That's how he got it. Steve Rogers entered the scene as not Nomad, but Captain America. This could mean that after the event of Ultron Genesis, which involved a lot of cooperation between Stark and Rogers, that the Sokovia Accords were repealed. It could have also been a response to Spider-Man's death, making the absence of the most dependable hero lead to a need for more heroes to be able to enter the picture. Rogers lets them know that they've been repaged by Star-Lord, but before they all could get ready and leave, they were paused by a portal that resembles the Sling Ring being spawned. Only difference is that it's the color red. The portal leads straight into Klyntar. Thor asks if they're leaving already, but Strange has to tell them that that's not his portal, and that whoever put it there wants them there right this second. So they enter, bringing them before the Guardians, still shackled to a wall. Strange tells Stark that he might want to settle for the nanosuit that he's wearing in a little compartment on his chest. Captain straps his vibranium shield in. Thor calls for Stormbreaker. Strange unites himself with his cloak of levitation, bringing with it the Agamotto. Lastly, Stark gets dressed by tapping his arc reactor, and the fight is on, a fraternity of strong heroes versus Requiem. This gives an incredible battle, full of strange spells, with Rogers being the super soldier that he is. However, absent from this fight is Thor and Stark. Why is that? Clearly, they were there when the fight first started, but where are they now? When Drax asks how much longer can they remain there being forced to watch their friends get beat, Star-Lord's answer is that Stark and Thor are getting their way out. Based on that detail, plus sequence of events, they were most likely there when the battle first started, but either voluntarily went back to Earth or were sent to Earth as a battle tactic and didn't come back. All part of a plan either way, however. Although Adam points out that since the stones were used to get them locked in, chances are the stones will be required to get them out. In the heat of the battle, Requiem strikes down Rogers and Strange with a power flurry. A flip phone flies off Rogers' pocket as he hits the ground. Strange immediately bounces back, but is knocked out of his cloak with the Power Stone. The independent cloak begins to wrap itself around the Infinity Stone that Requiem's blade is encrusted with. Requiem is now playing tug-of-war with the cloak for possession of the Space Stone. Eventually, Requiem tears the cloak, ripping it off the sword. The Space Stone flings out in the process. Requiem reaches out to catch the Space Stone, while Doctor Strange leaps forward to catch it as well. Strange manages to catch it, but since he's using his bare hands, he immediately begins to be pulled away into the space vacuum. Surrounded by a teleportation beam, he locks and secures the space stone into the eye of Agamotto. He lassos the device on his neck and quickly initiates his first move with it. In the process, Requiem uses the Power Stone once again and trucks him over 50 feet with it, sending him into a portal that goes to Earth. Requiem catches the Space Stone as it launches out of the eye of Agamotto and places it back into the Infinity Blade. To no avail, Rogers bashes half a shield at Requiem, who responds by gripping his neck, and starts lifting him as they start to swing the Infinity Blade toward his neck. Thor, however, charges into Requiem through a portal from Earth, sending them airborne. Finally, off their toes for a change, Requiem stands up to the view of a giant portal that was spawned by Dr. Strange before he was charged out of the scene. By the looks of it, a grand scheme was forged to call reinforcements. Captain America made the call. Stark rounded everyone together with the help of Thor, and Strange opened the portal to Klyntar with the Space Stone. Thor lets Requiem know that they can either relinquish this fight or accept defeat and embarrassment. Several individuals emerge from the portal, circling around Requiem, including more Avengers such as Scarlet Witch, Hawkeye, Black Widow, Nick Fury, Professor Hulk, Sam Wilson, Rhodey, and the Vision, alongside the X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Black Panther. Wilson gives Captain America a hand in pulling him back up to his feet. Vision uses a yellow beam from the Mind Stone to cut the Guardians free. However, he accidentally nicks the tip of Groot's head, freeing the Time Stone from his core, without even realizing it. The stone drops to the floor just as the Guardians did, but it bounced and rolled like a nickel on the loose. Captain yells for the Avengers, but right as he yells assemble, Requiem notices the token to their victory by the heel of their foot as everyone charges toward them. They pick up the stone and freeze time with Stormbreaker only centimeters away from making impact with their face. They suppress Vision from the effects of the stone for a fair fight. Vision swoops into Requiem with full force, sweeping them off their feet while sending them cratering into a wall. But as Vision takes on his opponent, he began to feel more and more pressure from his opponent, thanks to the power in Space Stones. Requiem is eventually able to turn the tables by overpowering Vision and sends the Infinity Blade puncturing through his chest. Vision releases his grip due to the pain. His power phases out and he drops 30 feet to the ground. Requiem drops down, right on top of Vision, and starts pounding into his skull with several deadly pummels. Unsympathetic for Vision's murder, Requiem picks up the Mind Stone right off his head and surges upon equipping it. Lastly, the hood of their cloak, which is when Nebula unfreezes everyone before executing a wish with a snap of their fingers. This summons the Black Order, the Chitauri, and even revives Thanos. The Sanctuary 2 could be seen in the planet's atmosphere, along with a Chitauri command center on standby. Nebula, who is Requiem, presents all 6 of the Infinity Stones to Thanos, who tells her to retrieve the gauntlet and they'll be on their way. Everyone activates in this battle. Rocket takes out a capsule of symbiote that he held onto and bonds with it, enhancing his capabilities. Thor takes out a few Chitauri gorillas. Iron Man takes out Thanos again, who claps back of course, and Thanos manages to beat Iron Man yet again before being tapped on the shoulder and met with an immediate knockout by Adam Warlock, with the Infinity Gauntlet serving as a brass knuckle. Adam says their mission should be to get the stones from Requiem. And Thompson says it's not happening because she has all 6. Drax says that Gamora can because she's always bested Nebula in combat. So that's now their plan for Gamora to confront Nebula and challenge her to a one-on-one fair fight combat. Everyone else will work on giving her a better opening. That is until the Collector arrives to blast the entire army with his power control ability. Richard Rider arrives as well, flying directly through the Chitauri Command Center, blowing it up. Gamora aboards Sanctuary 2, where Requiem awaits the gauntlet from one of their soldiers. They get into a sister-on-sister conflict about how Gamora's winning streak is what led to Nebula being alienated and abused by her father. so much that it's made her want to kill him. Now she can say she has. Now she gets the same respect that Gamora got from him. After this, in defeating Gamora on Eagle's planet years ago, she's checked off everything on her list. Gamora whips out the God Slayer. Nebula drops her cloak and readies her Infinity Blade. They have a fair fight, in which Nebula doesn't use any of the stones. And Nebula wins. She beats Gamora again, fair and square. She then bids Gamora a goodbye, as she holds up the Infinity Blade to eliminate her. But nothing happens. Adam Warlock asks if she was looking for this, as he shows her a fully complete Infinity Gauntlet, which he snaps his fingers with. What Adam does is he makes the Infinity Stones sentient. He believes that if anyone knows what's best for the Infinity Stones, it's them. This prompts the stones to fly away, to write their own destinies. And that is the conclusion of the first phase. Presumably all heroes and villains go their own way into a game of stones, which is initiated by Adam Warlock when he summons all the stones back for a proper fair fight. By that point, other teams emerge that are either reformed or newly developed, and are all bested by the Infinity Watch, a team run by Thanos and Requiem, who win all 6 stones, that are now locked away in a vault on the Sanctuary 2. The interesting thing about Game of Stones is that it takes place after a story in the Marvel MC continuity, but the event itself is not story-driven. Besides the beginning that explains how it all begins, it's more of a game-based event, because the fate of the stones in the continuity are determined by what happens during that event, and that's driven by the players. So canonically, in the end, Requiem, Thanos, and the rest of the Infinity Watch ended up with the stones. There's an entire video recapping the events of Game of Stones, but eventually there will be a novelization of sorts, turning everything that happened in real time into a cohesive story for players to follow. Now that we're finally at the end of this insanely long video, I'm going to see if I can make the wrap-up as quick as simple as possible. Going forward, I do intend to keep the story going. There are at least 4 events that I planned back then that I intend to finish. There's still a missing gauntlet that I talked about in the Game of Stones recap video. If that gauntlet does not show itself, it will be lifted by whoever possesses it, by being canonically introduced into the lore with the new holder. I'm also going to put a limit on how many events I do. In 2018, I did 8 story events, 12 in total if you count the ones that had nothing to do with the canon. 2019, it was 3 story events, 6 if you count all the others, such as Capture the Gauntlet, the 3-year anniversary Capture the Flag event that introduced the Infinity Watch as a team of antagonists that were up against the Avengers. In 2020, there were 8 events total, and they were all story-driven. My goal was to do 1 event per month, and I don't think I'll be doing that anymore. I think my goal will now be 1 event every quarter. This gives me time to properly market each event to new players so that it's not just returning players showing up to them. I'm also considering making them shorter, unless it's a big conclusion to an ongoing storyline similar to Quest for Requiem. The event that players experience on the server would be a summarized version of the story, unless it's very important for, like, say, a participant vote. The full story will be posted here on the channel. Hopefully 5 years from now, I won't need to make another big recap video because every event after these will be properly recapped one by one. Lastly, I want to experiment with different event formats. Game of Stones was wildly different. It was controversial due to the stakes, the ending, and the rematch, but the concept itself was gold. If there can be more different ways to have events that can properly get the players hooked into what's going on without being only one familiar format, then I think it can increase the level of excitement that there is to have for the events. I'm on something big that I have in mind. I just need to lock down the best way to execute it. But I can't wait to announce it once I figure it out. And that's it for this video. I hope that it was either useful, entertaining, or anything other than a pointless waste of time to whoever decided to click on it. As you all know, I've been keeping basically everything a surprise, so if you all want to be kept in the loop, just subscribe and click the bell icon so that as soon as we have another release, you'll get it. But one announcement I will make is that there's supposed to be a Q&A coming out in the near future, so keep an eye on Marvel MC community post feed where questions will be collected. Until next time, bye.